Hello and welcome to the Martial Arts Teaching Tactics Podcast. I'm Chris Kent, and I'm joining Chris Bean. Mr. Bean?
Hello, sir.
Today we're going to take a deep dive into demonstrating information to your class. We've kind of covered this a little bit before on previous episodes. Specifically, I'm thinking of our learning styles episode. We did had a little bit of a conversation about different ways to demonstrate and present information to your class. But like I said, we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into it and some things that are important to keep in mind when you are demonstrating your information to your class. Because the primary way that we share information with our students is by demonstrating. Therefore, we need to do the best that we can to deliver the information in a way that each student can see, hear, and understand what we are doing. Now, there are a couple of ways that we can achieve this. We can achieve this by allowing the students to move so they can see our instruction, or by having everyone sit or kneel. That way, it's easier for everyone to kind of see what we're doing as we're doing it. When we're demonstrating a new move to the class, we need to make sure of a couple of things. Number one, we need to make sure that we know the information we are going to teach. Number two, we need to make sure that we can break down that information into smaller, easier to understand chunks. Number three, we need to make sure we can perform the information slowly enough to talk through what we are teaching. And number four, we need to be sure to perform the information at the level we want our students to perform the information.
So, starting right at the beginning, you have to know the information that you're going to be teaching. How can you teach information that you don't know yourself? First and foremost, you need to know the ins and outs, all the questions perhaps that the students could be asking, because inevitably they're going to ask questions. And when they ask questions, if you give them the answer, I don't know, that's probably not the best way to deal with that. So if you know the information that you're teaching, that would be so much easier to ask those what if questions, or hey, how about this, or is it this way, or is it, you'll know those answers because you know the information that you're teaching, right? That is first and foremost. You need to know the information well enough to be able to break it down into those smaller, easier to understand chunks of information. If you're teaching a 10-move sequence and you teach all 10 moves at one time, your students will be lost. They're not going to understand or know how to do those 10 moves, because by the time you get to that 10th move in the sequence, they've forgotten number 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and so on. So if you can break that down into, okay, here's the first 3 moves, or here's the first 2 moves, okay, here's the next couple moves, and so on, that will make the information so much easier for your students to understand and grasp and be able to perform, because you have broken it down into those smaller chunks of information. If it's too complicated, right? If you're overcomplicating the information, so if you have a 3-move sequence, and you give them way too much information, okay, it's this, and you're really going into in depth and all the the ins and outs of everything as you're explaining it. You're answering everybody's questions before they even ask it. That is okay at some point later on, maybe once they've already have practiced this information. But perhaps when they're first being introduced into this information, you give them the bare minimum, right? Okay, here, these are the moves. Let's go practice it. As they do it more and more, you can deliver more information to them so they can understand the information more. But if you deliver all of that all up front, all at one time, they may feel overwhelmed. You're making the information too complicated at that point. So give them what they need so they can go out and practice it, and then after they've done it a couple times, then you can start to pile on that more information a little bit at a time so they can understand the ins and outs of it in a slower process instead of all at one time.
And a couple more points about those points. Number one, knowing the information you need to teach. I'm trying to put it into terms. Maybe I'll just say what I'm thinking and not think about it so much. But there's nothing worse than not having an answer for someone. They have a question for you. Hey, what if this? What if this? What if this? And you don't have an answer for them because you haven't thought about what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. You can't answer that question. The last thing we want to do is just say, oh, well, do it this way because it's this way. Do it this way because I said so. Do it this way because I'm telling you to do it this way right now. Not having that answer is a terrible feeling. So being able to know your information and know what's going on and be able to express that and demonstrate that well is part of what makes us good instructors and makes us the best martial arts instructor in the world. On top of that, if you don't know the answer, the thing to do is to say, hey, I'm not sure, but I will go find out and let you know. Then you go find out, you do the work, you ask some questions, whatever it is you need to do to find an answer, and then come back with that answer. And don't leave it at, oh, I don't know. Or just do it because I told you to do it. That's the last thing we want to do is just rule them or rule over them with our authority and just say that, hey, stop thinking about what you're doing, because we want them to think about it. We want them to engage with it. We want them to understand it themselves and think about it from all different angles. So we need to be prepared for those questions and have the answers and actually know the moves inside and out, forward and backward, from the side, upside down, all that kind of stuff. We need to know the moves ourselves. That way we can answer those questions. And then make sure our students also know the things that well, because again, that's what we want. We want them to be very good at what they do and really knowledgeable about the moves we're teaching them. So if we don't know that ourselves, we can't give the information to them. And a great way to do this is also by chunking down the information, because when you start to slow down what you're doing and have to think about what you're doing in smaller bits, it really helps you to engage and really focus on every single part of the move. So for example, I'm sure there's forms or patterns or katas that you know that you maybe have never taught before. And I would encourage, if you have some time, take that form and try to teach it to someone else, or just try to engage with it in a way that you would be teaching it. And I think you'll quickly find out that there's small intermediate motions, or there's chambers, and there's steps, and there's hand techniques, or whatever it is that you haven't really thought through what actually is happening, let alone how you're going to convey that information to someone else. So just doing that, I think, is beneficial not only for you as a martial artist to think about each single move, but it's going to make you a better instructor when it comes time to teach that move. But don't try to do it all at once. I'm not going to take a 45 move form and then try to break down every single piece in one sitting. I'm going to take a section of it, think about the individual moves, the individual pieces, and really understand what's happening well enough for me to be able to demonstrate and convey and teach that to somebody else. And I think that that'll bring you to another level as a martial artist, but also as a teacher too, knowing everything about what you are teaching, and then also knowing how to do it in small sections so that it's manageable, but then also you're not skipping over any of the small details or the fine parts that easily can be skipped if you do it really fast or all at once as a whole.
Yeah, as you're performing these moves, you want to take a look at the level of intensity that you're performing them at. Because if you're performing these moves at a low level intensity, your students will think that's how it's supposed to be done, and they will in turn also perform at a low level intensity. If you perform at a high level intensity, your students will have a higher bar or higher standard to hold themselves to, and they will do their best to perform at that higher level standard. So as you're performing these moves, really take note of how you're doing them. Are you doing them the way that you want your students to be performing them, right? Because if you're doing them at low level intensity or low, you're not really taking notes of the fine little details, they're going to take that as, oh, that's how I'm supposed to do it, and they're going to do it that way. So as you're doing them, demonstrate these moves the way that you would like your students to perform them. If you want them to perform at lower intensity or slower or however, then demonstrate it that way. If you want it to be the other way, if you want it to be a high level intensity or shorter or quicker type movements, then do it that way. And now, maybe you understand this, but I'm going to say this anyways. Of course, as you're delivering the information the first time around, yes, you have to do it slower and at a lower intensity, right? Okay, here's this breakdown. This is what the move looks like. Here's the basic motions, okay? This is how we're going to practice it. Now, this is what it looks like when it's all put together. Boom! And then they get to see that. Oh, okay, yep. Then that light bulb can be, or that click can happen for them. Oh, that's what it's supposed to look like when I know when I know what I'm doing. Great. So you do it the slow way so you can see, the students can see all the ins and outs of the moves and how it's supposed to work. And then you say, okay, listen, this is what it should look like. Boom! And then you show it, right? That will be the level, that will be the standard that the students can try to live up to, right? Show it at the slower pace so they can see the moves. But then when it comes time to, okay, listen, guys, this is what it should look like, pow, then you let them see it, right? The way that you want them to be doing it so they can live up to that level.
Or alternatively, you show it really fast, how it should be, and then you slow it down so that they understand, okay, we're going to work up to this quick type motion. This is what it's supposed to look like, but now let's talk about the different moves and have them practice it, because also when you're learning a technique, it's not always best to do it fast. So again, demonstrate it the way it's supposed to be done, then break it down, slowly work your way through it so eventually they can do it at that speed that you want it at. I think it's a good tactic as well, because then, like you said, they know what it's supposed to look like. They know what they're working toward, but we're not trying to throw them off the cliff and say, hey, okay, do this like this right now without practicing it. So knowing what it looks like, working your way up to it is also a good way to go about that.
Yes, sir. When demonstrating a new movement to your class, always be sure to show different angles, right? Because your students are, unless they're moving around as you're doing this, which is not always beneficial, hopefully the students are sitting down or kneeling or at least stationary. You're demonstrating this movement, show it from one side. Okay, now turn, do it from the other side, show it from front on, show it from back, so they can see what it looks like in all the pieces of it. Unless you have lots of mirrors around you, it's going to be difficult for them to pay attention to the other side that they can't see right now if they're on one side of you. And then if you have mirrors, use those mirrors. Okay, listen, I know you guys aren't on this side, but look in the mirror on this spot right here. See my hand? Yes, this one right here. Yep, see it's moving? Yep, this one. Watch what this one does, right? So they can see that. They can... You're calling their attention to that area on that side of your body that they're not necessarily on, but via the mirrors or on the side that you're on. That, hey, look, this hand, my right hand. See, my right hand's moving. This one right here. Watch what this one does. So whatever else is going on, hopefully they're paying attention to that hand or that foot or whatever that detail is that you're trying to explain. But by showing it in lots of different angles, that will help to fill in the picture for your students. If they can only see one side of it, they're only going to get a one-dimensional or maybe a two-dimensional image of what that move looks like. The more times you can turn and show it at different angles, the fuller that image will be, the more four-dimensional or three-dimensional or however many dimensions there are of that move that they can fill in for themselves.
Talking about that too, I think this goes back into the earlier point of knowing your material, because if let's say we're doing a self-defense move that I've only trained on with the right side of my body, it may be hard for me to demonstrate on the left side of my body, which might be the best way for me to show that information to my students. So having a better understanding of the techniques on both sides, whether it be a hand technique, foot technique, self-defense, or whatever it is, I think that's beneficial as well, and it ties back into knowing your material. And you were talking about the hand. If I'm using one hand, I wave it around or show it. And if you can't see, he's waving his hand around, making it all crazy. Something I picked up from another instructor too. I don't do it very often, but I will. If I'm using a hand or something, I'll snap. I snap the hand I'm going to use, and then I can do the technique. So not only do they see my hand moving, but they can that snap kind of. I at least like to think it draws them in. Looks, okay, look right here. This is the one that moves, and then you do the technique, and again helps to draw the focus into the spot you want it to be. Again, I don't do it often, and it's not my idea, but I find it beneficial, or at least I feel like it's helpful if I can draw their attention to that hand with a quick snap.
Once you've had some time teaching, you've had some experience teaching, you'll have a sort of database of do's and don'ts. You can use this database as an ever-changing way to improve your lessons. You'll understand the things that work and the things that don't work. The things that don't work, you take and you throw those away. The things that do work, you use those and you move on. And then as you find more things that do work, you put those into your toolbox. So each time you teach a low block, for example, you have a go-to way for teaching that low block because you've had time built up. You have experience of this works, this works, this works. This doesn't work, throw that away. This works, and so on. So as you have more time on the floor, as you have more time interacting and teaching your students your different moves, the more do's you'll have in your database and the more opportunities or the more beneficial ways you can demonstrate and more drills you can build, and the students will have a better opportunity to learn those moves because you'll have more time and more experience teaching those moves. And right, as you're teaching, try to collectively think about, hey, this worked. Great, I'm going to use that next time. Hey, this worked. Awesome. This didn't work so great. I don't know what didn't work about it. Maybe I'll think about that later, but right now I'm just set that to the side. Oh, this didn't work at all. This is so unbeneficial, and we were basically moving the wrong direction. Let's throw that away, right? So as you're teaching those things, right, and that's something you can kind of do on the fly. Okay, this worked, great. All right, guys, ready to go. And then you see, man, this is not working. Okay, stop. Let's do something different. Think about those things, and both from an instructional side, but also from a student side, right? Why didn't this work? Maybe think about that, not on the floor while you're teaching it, but later on, think about what you can do to improve those things, to make those don'ts into do's. And if there's no way to improve it, it just was the wrong thing to do, throw it away, get rid of it, right? And the more time you have teaching, the more do's you'll have in your database, the more efficient you can be while you're demonstrating or while you're teaching those movements. And really that's the key, right? You want to be efficient as you're teaching these moves. If you have somebody that's just starting out, it's their first day teaching, they're going to have lots of don'ts, right? They're going to try lots of things that hopefully will work, but probably won't work. But you have somebody who's been teaching for 20 years and they've taught this move, countless number of times, that hundreds of students, they're going to be able to teach that move no problem, right? 5 minutes, boom, they got it. That first person's on 20 minutes and the students barely are understanding what the person's saying. That will come with experience. And unfortunately, unless you are interacting and thinking about your teaching like that, it will happen, but it will happen later on. If you can start, or even today, no matter where you're at in your teaching cycle, if you can start today and think about how to interact with these moves in a more efficient manner, how can you demonstrate these moves? What are the more do's and what are the don'ts? And if the don'ts are just straight don'ts, or maybe they can be tweaked, you can change those later on, but only do the do's. Okay, this worked, this worked, this worked. Great. Do those things. Do the things that have worked in the past and will hopefully continue to work. And if you find that something did work in the past and now it isn't working, don't try to keep doing it. Take it, change it, do something else so that you can be more efficient as you're teaching these things, right? As you're demonstrating, you want your demonstration to be minimal, right? You want to demonstrate the moves, get your point across, and okay, students, go practice, right? Because that's where they're going to be able to interact with the moves themselves and actually learn and retain the information. If they just come to class and you talk or do karate the whole time and they never get an opportunity to do anything, they're not going to learn anything. The learning happens from them doing the moves. You have to give them the information, show them what it looks like, tell them how to do it, teach them how to do it, yes. But if they don't get an opportunity to get up and do those things, they're not going to know those, right? So as you're demonstrating, try to be efficient, right? Think of the do's and do those do's. And if you get a drill or a philosophy or a mindset that doesn't work, take it out for right now. Maybe you can come back, revisit, think about it. How can you tweak it to make it work? But until then, only do the do's that do work. Have that database of do's and do those things. And hopefully I didn't say do too many times and that made sense. But have that database and think about your craft in that way so that you can demonstrate these moves in a shorter time. Be efficient as you're demonstrating so that your students have more time to actually get up and move around and do those things that you're teaching them.
There will be trial and error too. There's nothing wrong with that. Like you said, you're going to have to find some things that work and you find some things that don't work. But the only way you're going to find which is by doing it and running through those things. And like you said, even if something doesn't work at a certain point in time, it doesn't mean you should completely abandon it. Maybe come back to it and dissect and figure out why it didn't work so that you can add that into your toolbox after you figure out how to make it work. So, yes, it's nice to have these things that work, but I think we can get stuck by only doing the one thing and being convinced that it's the way to do it because it worked one time. Well, sure, maybe it works one time, but if you do the same thing every single class for 4 classes in a row, you're going to have students that get disinterested and decide they don't want to be here anymore because your class isn't engaging enough and you're not disguising the repetition well enough and you're not doing enough different things that it's helping them to stay motivated and stay engaged in your class. So don't be afraid to try stuff out. Find out what works, find out what doesn't work. And in that, don't be afraid to say, hey, this didn't work. Because it's very easy to stand in front of the students and try something and try to force it and make it work so that you don't look like you are trying or are doing trial and error. But there's nothing wrong with that. Take the time to work through those things and make your classes better for your students by engaging in those things and not being afraid to say, okay, hey, this didn't work. Let's do something else. I'll either come back to it or I'll figure out why it didn't work and we'll try it again later. But that's totally okay to do that, and there's nothing wrong with working through those things in front of your students or in the class too.
We talked about this a little bit already, but as you're up there, you're demonstrating your moves, be clear and concise with your information. And sometimes, from time to time, you'll have a student says, well, what if this? What if that? Don't listen, let's worry about doing the moves right now. Once we've done them, if you have more what if questions, I'll be glad to answer them. But right now, it's time to get up and do these moves. So let's practice it, and then as you're practicing, see if you can answer those what if questions yourself, right? Because if is the middle word in life, always is going to be what if questions. You could stand there all day and ask, well, what if this? What if that? Don't do that, right? Just right now, I need you guys to get up and we can practice these moves. After you've done them a few times, if you have some other questions, you have those what if questions, and let me know. We'll talk about it after class. But right now, we need to just get up and do it, because sure enough, you'll have somebody that will say, what if this? And then everybody else is like, oh man, this guy again. I just want to do the move. And more often than not, there'll be more of those people that'll be interested in getting up and doing the move than whatever that question was, right? And that question perhaps isn't even relevant because they haven't even done the move yet. If there's a legit what if question after they've had time, they've done the move, then sure, yep, answer those questions. And I'm not saying don't answer questions from your students, but after they've had opportunity to interact with those moves and do those, then if they have those questions, then go into them. But as you're demonstrating the move for the first time, don't stand there and answer 10 questions about what if this, what if that, what if that. Oh man, we got to move on to the next thing now because all the time was spent answering those questions. Sorry, kids, you didn't get to get up and do those because we asked too many questions, right? That's not helpful, right? If they have questions, great. Have them ask you afterwards, like after class or after they've had time to interact with those movements. Lots of times after they've had time to interact with those movements, they'll find, oh, yep, that what if question doesn't make sense because it can't happen. But because they haven't had an opportunity to do those movements yet, they don't know that yet, right? So try to keep your demonstration, especially when you're demonstrating it for the first time, you're teaching this information brand new to these students for the first time. Keep your demonstration clear and concise, shorter. Let them get up and do the moves. Give them an opportunity to interact with those movements for themselves. Then you can answer those questions, or then you can go into more detail about the movements.
This ties back into the learning cycle too. I mean, if you think about the stages of the learning cycle, you have the information intake, then they have their guided practice, then their self-practice, and then almost last is the situational based practice. So, the way we teach this is it's here's our roadmap from point A to point B. Here's what we ideally, in a good situation, want to happen. Now, of course, we understand it's not always going to happen that way, but we want them to learn and practice and really understand the point from point A to point B, and that would be I would think the prescribed method of doing it. And then after they're really good at that prescribed method of doing it, we throw in the different situations. Okay, now what if this happens? Okay, well, I would do this and this and this to find my way back to that road and that path that we know so well. So just, again, look at it from the lens of the learning cycle. They need to have that guided practice of the specific way it needs to go before eventually they end up doing the situational based practice, which I would think would be the what if questions here and there at different situations that might happen. So, I don't want to look at it as a point of like, hey, there's only one way to do this, because we know not everything's going to happen the way we want it to. So we need to make sure that they are prepared for those what if things. But as far as the curriculum and the learning process goes, that's something that happens a little bit later after we have that defined foundation and that defined point A to point B roadmap. So don't mistake this as saying, hey, don't engage what if questions. I think it's important to talk about those and deal with them, but there is a time and place for it after they already have that understanding, that good base to work off of.
As you're demonstrating, there's one question that you need to ask your students. After you've demonstrated the move, one question to ask them, and that is, does anybody need to see it again? because you may have shown it this way and that way and this way and from this side or whatever. And that may be enough for you, who has done the move a bunch of times. You understand how it works, but as you're demonstrating the move for the first time to the class, that may not be the angles that they need to see it from. So the one question you need to ask your students after you've done demonstrating the move, does anybody need to see it again? And if so, what side was best? Where do you need to see it at from? Was it this angle? Was it that? Find that out and then do that again. Because if you have somebody that's brave enough to raise their hand in class and say, yep, I need to see it again, I'm sure there's at least one other person, if not a handful of other people, that needed to see it again but just didn't raise their hand. So the one question you ask after you're done demonstrating the move is, does anybody need to see it again? And then if so, do it in whatever way is best for them. Come closer to them, further away, whatever it is, so they can see it. And then, okay, is everybody good? Everybody's got it now? Great. All right, let's do it. Make sure to, if you don't already do that, add that in, because, again, that may help only just one student, but it also may help only one student that's brave enough to raise their hand and 7 other that didn't have the courage to raise their hand.
And speaking of brave, I'm glad you used that word. If someone does raise their hand, make sure you address that as delicately and as in a caring manner. So for example, you raise your hand and you need to see it again. I don't go, oh my gosh, you need to see it again? Why didn't you get it the first time? How did you not understand what I was like? Because that's going to take away that bravery and make everybody afraid to raise their hand, because you're just going to chew them out after they do. You want to encourage them to raise their hand. And that can be intimidating in a class where, there's 20 people and you ask, hey, does anyone need to see it again? And no one raises their hand. Well, if I need to see it again and I'm the only one that is about to raise my hand, it can be nerve-wracking. So when someone does raise their hand and we call on them and we ask those questions and things, we need to handle that with care, not only to reassure them that it's okay to raise their hand and ask those questions, but also to help encourage everyone else in the future. If you have a question, raise your hand. That way we can deal with it here and there, because it can be, a tough thing for especially younger students that are in classes that might be anxious or nervous about it, to raise their hand if they need help. So just handle that well, and don't talk down on people who have to see it again, but handle it in a caring way. That way everyone understands and knows, okay, it's okay for me to raise my hand and ask questions, and it's not, not something to be ashamed of or embarrassed about. We want to make sure that you all understand. And like he said, you're going to have that one brave student. Well, you don't see the 7 others who actually need to see it again, but are too afraid to raise their hand. So, really praise and take care of the people that do end up raising their hand, because it gives you opportunity to demonstrate things better for the entire class.
When you're demonstrating new moves, if you, the instructor, are the only person that is demonstrating these moves, that for a while that may be adequate, may be necessary. But hopefully at a time in your students' training, they get to a point where they can kind of understand the moves. They maybe not know this new move yet. Maybe you pull them to the side, okay, listen, hey, bud, this is what we're going to do. I want you to demonstrate this move next, right? Super easy, here it is. Do it a couple times, okay, great. Then you call the class to stop, they watch you, and the student is the one who demonstrates the move. You talk them through the movements. Sure, yep, great. You explain the movements as they do it, absolutely. But the student is the one who's performing the move. The students get to see the other student, their own peer, up there in front of the class demonstrating the move. This will be a huge, huge confidence boost to that student. On top of that, it will be a reassurance to the classmates, the other students that are in class, because they will know, oh, hey, I'm the same belt as this guy, or I'm the same belt as she is. I can do that move because she did it. Okay, great. If they only ever see you do the move, yep, sure, he's done karate for 30 years. Of course he can do it. I can't do that. No way I can do that. But if they see another student do the move, that will bring it down. Oh, well, maybe I can actually do this move. They can do it. I think I'm better than they are. I could probably do this. Right? That will be such a confidence boost, or such a reassurance to the students seeing their peer do it. Confidence boost to that student who is out there doing the move. Huge. Now, because of that, because that's such a big confidence boost. That person, that student that you get to choose to be there to help you demonstrate that move, you need to carefully pick them. There's a couple sides to this coin. Number one, you need to pick somebody that is able to do the move. You don't want to set them up for failure. Don't pick, the lowest student on the list because they need that confidence boost. They get up there, they can't perform it. Man, that didn't work. Go sit down. I had somebody else do it, or I'll do it myself. That will demoralize them. Don't want that. You need to pick somebody that is at least relatively confident. Maybe you interact with them a little bit, like I said, before you get up on stage, sort of, to demonstrate the move. So they're not up there and they fail in front of everybody. That would be terrible. But on top of that, you don't want to put the person up there who has a big ego, because then their ego gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And on top of that, you don't always want to choose the same student. Mix it up. Choose different people. Hey, who wants to be my partner this time? And then you pick somebody. Pick somebody from your class. That will be super beneficial. Now, if you can do that to a student that's relatively confident with their move, but also needs a confidence boost, well, you can see that would be incredibly beneficial for them. Just make sure that you're not setting them up for failure. You don't want them to get up there, be on, quote unquote, on stage, not be able to perform the move or not understand what you're telling them and not be able to do it, and then that backfires. From time to time, unfortunately, you probably will experience that. Understand that likely, at some point in your years that will happen. Just do your best to minimize that to happening. Try to choose somebody that is relatively confident and perhaps needs a confidence boost to be up there, to be your partner, to demonstrate those moves. Now, this also could be the other way. Maybe you are the one who demonstrates the move. Everybody gets an opportunity to do it, and you see somebody that's performing really well. Stop the class. Hey, Johnny, come on up. Show everybody what you've been working on. Yeah, go ahead, man. Show them. Boom. All right, man, look how awesome. Look at those stances. Locks his body in. That was a nice, strong punch. Good job. Give him 5. And everybody clap for him. Give him a hand. Everybody claps for him. Huge confidence boost to that guy, right? To Johnny. Again, that's a situation where you demonstrated the move. They had an opportunity to interact with it. Then you bring somebody up. Now, after that person goes, after they've done that demonstration, you applaud them. Good job. Then you ask the students, now listen, can you guys do it as good as he did? Yes, sir. Okay, let's see it. Go. And then everybody, that can kind of remotivate everybody to try to do it just as good as whoever you chose to demonstrate that move. Just another tool to add to your toolbox as you're demonstrating your movements. Now, what does your team do? If it's you and you have a few team members in your class, as you, the one person who's demonstrating a movement, what is your team's responsibility? What is their role? What are they supposed to be doing as you're demonstrating those movements? There's a couple things. If there are pads that need to be set up, if there's different places they need to be standing in, they can get ready for that. They can get the pads out and ready as you're demonstrating. Another thing they can be doing, instead of being mesmerized by you demonstrating the movement, just watching you, they can be watching the students, making sure they're sitting correctly, make sure they're paying attention, right? Hey guys, stop talking. Watch what they're doing, right? Those are all small little things that perhaps could go even unnoticed that will greatly help in your demonstration of the movement, right? Having the pads set up, making sure their students are paying attention. Now, hopefully they are at least somewhat understanding of the movement. If they don't know the movement, then of course they're going to have to pay attention to it. That means they're not going to be able to set those pads up, or they're not going to be able to get the students to pay attention. So that comes with training your team so they know what's going to be happening. They have a lesson plan. They can look at the lesson plan. They can check in and hey, I don't know this move. What is this? They ask you before class, or be ready for the class as it's happening. But if they have that time as you're demonstrating a move, have them get the pads out. Get them ready. Get the students so they're paying attention. Now, this will be something you will have to verbalize to your team. Hey, listen, as I'm demonstrating these movements, I need the pads out and ready, and they need to be in these spots. Okay, can you guys do that for me? Okay, yeah, great. Stop the class, you demonstrate. They're on autopilot. They're getting stuff ready. You start the drill or whatever the next movement is, and all the pads are ready, everything's set, done. Great, efficient. You can move right into it. Now, if you are doing
Sorry, one more thing about that too. If you are demonstrating a move, I mean, it's you there doing the move, and you're in front of the class, the place for those team members to be is not right beside you or standing there up front looking at them as you're up there demonstrating, because then that takes away from your demonstration, takes away from your students being able to focus on you doing what you need them to do. So if I'm up front demonstrating a move, I don't need Mr. Bean standing right next to me or behind me or 2 steps to the right of me. He should be on the side of the class, watching the students, preparing things, getting things ready. And not only that, but if you have a viewing area for some of the parents too, I don't want the instructors lined up in front of that viewing area so they have no idea what's going on. If they're in front of a viewing area, maybe they take a knee or they have a seat or they move out of the way. That way there's a clear line of sight, not only for the students, but for the parents. And then we're not distracted by 5 people standing at the front of the room as one person is demonstrating. It is that stage, as Mr. Bean said. So whoever is the lead actor, whoever's demonstrating that move, should be the focal point and the main focus of the stage. So if I'm assisting, I'm not going to stand right next to him. I'm going to stand out of the way. I'm going to kind of duck down if I need to, or kneel down out of the way so people can get a better line of sight, and then keep my eye on the class, making sure they're sitting correctly or paying attention, and then if need be, getting the things also prepared for the next drill. So as much as we are a team, at those moments we need their focus to be on the one person and what they're doing. So we want to be out of the way. That way that's easier for our students to focus on them.
So if you're doing a demonstration and you have a partner drill that you're doing, best you can try to use a team member for that. And here's a couple of reasons why. Reason number one, if you're doing a partner drill on a student who doesn't know what you're going to do to them, the probability of them getting hurt or injured in that situation is high. They don't know how to react. They don't know what's going to happen. That's not a good situation, right? On top of that, they maybe aren't trained on how to fall or how to counteract what it is that you're doing so they don't get hurt because they've never been in that situation before. And you're not going to be able to perform at the same level of intensity because that student doesn't know what's going to be happening. So when you can, in situations, if you can have a team member up there that knows what you're going to do, knows how to fall or counteract whatever it is that you're doing, that will be beneficial because then you can show it at the level of intensity that you need it at. And the partner who's not necessarily doing the move gets to see how they need to move their body so they don't get hurt. Hey, fall this way. Do this so that it doesn't break your wrist or whatever it is. But if the students don't know that, then they don't know that and they potentially would get hurt. And that'd be terrible if you're up there demonstrating a move and you have to have a student come up to demonstrate with you and you hurt them and then, well, they're not coming back. And then you do that again next time and, that person's not coming back. You will quickly run out of students. So if you can have a team member up there with you to demonstrate the move, then you can do it at the level of intensity that you would like the students to do it at. And nobody's going to get hurt because they know how to react or respond or fall or whatever it is to those movements that you're doing, right? So if you don't have a situation like that, then if you don't have a team member that you can pull in to be that partner with you, then you have to let that student know, hey, listen, this is what we're going to do. Maybe do it a few times before you get, quote unquote, on stage to perform. And even then, you're not going to be able to do it at the same intensity that you should do it at if you had a team member as your partner. So just take all of that into consideration when or if you have a partner-based drill that you're doing as you're demonstrating.
And you can combine this with an earlier idea. Maybe the first time you show it, you do it with your team member. You do it with a staff member that knows what's going to happen. Then you give the students a little bit of time to practice it. Well, maybe you come back to add some additional details or correct some mistakes that you see. Then pull a student who you think is doing well or needs a confidence boost, or, as we talked about earlier, can come up and demonstrate with you after they've had some time to kind of interact with it and train with it themselves, because then you still are able to demonstrate what you are trying to demonstrate well with your staff member. But then after the fact, you get that student involved, and then all the benefits of seeing, a peer up front doing these moves is going to be added to your demonstration. So, all of this stuff can kind of work off of each other, and all these different concepts can work together. But understanding them each individually and the kind of hierarchy of it and the process and the way it progresses is important to actually implementing them well into your class.
So, a couple key points, a couple key takeaways from today. Demonstrating your movements is the primary way that your students are going to learn their information. If you can't demonstrate the movement, the students aren't going to be able to know what they're doing, right? So first and foremost, that. And then as you're demonstrating, have a database of do's and don'ts, and take those do's and run with them, and then take the don'ts and maybe tweak them or change them or throw them away later on. If you're doing something that isn't working, drop it, move on, do something that does work, right? Have that database built up over time as you do that. And if you have been teaching for a length of time and you don't have that database, if you haven't thought about interacting with your movements that way, take some time, do that. That would be hugely beneficial for you and for your students. And then the last key takeaway is, don't always be the one person demonstrating the movements. Let your students shine. Shine the light on them so they can feel that confidence, but everybody else can know that, oh, it's not just that guy, it's not just you or that girl that can demonstrate this movement. It's my peers, it's my other students that can do it. And if they can do it, I know I can do it. Those are your takeaways for today.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And just listening to those takeaways as well, I think it's important that we figure this stuff out. And I don't necessarily think quantify it in a specific way, but being able to convey the information about demonstration. So I guess, for lack of better words, demonstrate how to demonstrate is going to be important when you're working with your staff and building up your staff, because we want to be able to have those skills that we can translate to other people and have them perform the same way. So if you haven't thought about these do's and don'ts and these different tactics to do this kind of thing, then maybe think about it. That way you can communicate that to your staff and then help build them up as well, to be able to be good demonstrators and good instructors out on the floor. As always, you can find us online at MA Teaching Tactics, MA for Martial Arts, Teaching Tactics. Again, that's MA Teaching Tactics. We'd love to hear from you guys, some of your favorite ways of demonstrating things, or maybe even some don'ts that you encountered that you turned into do's, or roadblocks that you encountered that we can hear how you worked through to benefit us. Because, as always, we have a way of doing things, and we have things that work for us, but we want to hear from other people and the way that they approach problems and deal with these things on the floor. So you can reach out to us at MA Teaching Tactics. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, Instagram, the internet, basically. I would hope if you search MA Teaching Tactics, maybe we'd pop up. But anyways, we're all on social like normal, and we hope to hear from you guys. So thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Chris Kent.
And I'm Chris Bean.